Alright, so hey, now I'm going to start. Alright, one of these. So a little bit after 3, I think all the talk's gone now. I'm here to just tell you kind of my story with free software. I work in the industry. I might look young, but I am out of college. I'm currently employed over at Microsoft, and I mean, just over like the last couple days, I've gotten to hang out with all of you here at Reflection Projections. Yeah. Helped some people with like Mac Mania last night. It's been a lot of fun, and I just wanted to try to get all of you into open source, not just think that you have to go into industry and that's the end of it. There's no more open source work to do. No, there's tons of open source work to do everywhere. So here's my story of free software. Starts with me. So I'm Andy Schwartzmeyer, Andrew, but you can call me Andy. If you want to find me anywhere, it's Anschwa, just about everywhere. I'm a bit of a programmer, of course. Does this? Oh yeah, it does. But I'm also a bookworm. So I've been reading the 5th season series, the Stroke and Earth series. It's sci-fi. It's pretty good. If you like books, then check it out. I'm also a runner. So if you find Anschwa on Strava, you want to follow me, go for it. Of course, being a programmer, somebody who spends a lot of time with computers, I love video games. So I've been playing a lot of Overwatch. I'm kind of a Winston main at this point. I dabble in some Soldier 76. It's a lot of fun. I've taken up baking a little bit. So, you can have hobbies outside of software, even if you're somebody who looks like me who just absolutely loves free software all the time. Actually, the funny story with baking was I watched The Great British Baking Show. It's on Netflix. Check it out. I got the Mary Berry's Baking Bible and just kind of started following recipes. Surprisingly, it's just like programming. So I could never cook because cooking to me is more of an art. You have to see what you've got in your kitchen and throw it together. Doesn't work for me. But baking is just following instructions and making something work programmatically. So I think that might tie into why I like it so much. One other thing I want to plug here is octagon.social. So there are new social networks that you can hang out on instead of Twitter and Facebook, which suck. There's Mastodon, if you haven't heard of it. It's an extension of the Free Software Foundation's status.net protocol, but into a more microblogging sort of area. It's pretty cool to check out. You can find me there too. Is this cool? Yes. So I'm also a U of I student. Not this U of I, just University of Idaho. I transferred there actually, so I started not in computer science at all. I have been a Linux user since I was 9, which probably got me into computers, but I honestly didn't know I wanted to program. I'd never programmed through middle school and high school. I used Linux, and so you program a little bit in Bash, of course, but I actually went into political science to start with. I spent a year studying poli-sci, and then I swapped between philosophy and English. Much as it was fun, I realized I didn't want to go into law school. I didn't really know what to do, and I started looking at what's available, and I kind of wanted to be in a public school. So I found the University of Idaho. I'm from Idaho originally. I didn't look at it because, like most kids, they want to leave home. But I came back home to the University of Idaho. I studied computer science for 4 years. I added a mathematics degree, which if you're currently studying CS, you probably already take a bunch of math classes. If you like them at all, or even if you hate them right now, because like basic math classes, not basic, but your early calculus classes get dreary, check out the later courses of math. I think 2 of my favorite classes ever. I took Abstract Algebra 1 and 2, which surprisingly worked out to be a really good fit for a programmer. It's just talking about types and morphisms among types and stuff. I still study it a little bit today, so there's a fantastic series on category theory for programmers by, I think the guy's name is Bartosz. Oh God, I butchered it. But he's on YouTube, he's got a set of lectures. Math really can go with computer science. Even if you hate it to begin with, I would encourage you to add a minor, take some more math classes. Oh, also, so this is an ACM run conference, and I'm fucking impressed with you guys, so sorry, I probably shouldn't curse in that presentation. I was the president my last year at University of Idaho of our ACM team, and I'd like to say that we were as awesome as you guys, but we weren't. This conference has been absolutely fantastic. We had some cool projects that we did, and we had a group of kids that were a lot of fun. We spent a lot of time doing this Tower Lights project, so we had a big dormitory where we put LEDs in each window up to the sink, so we had like a, I want to say 4 by 8 pixel grid, and then we blast music in the courtyard in front of it, have like Tetris go by to the music. It was pretty cool and it was fun, but this has just blown everything out of the water for me from what I've seen with like what student organizations can accomplish. Seriously, keep at it. Reflections Projections has been fantastic. The other thing I'll just mention, I also have actually taught a little bit. I know, I look young, but we had a Computer Science 120. It was our intro to programming with C++. You guys probably, of course, have a similar class. And I got to teach the labs of it. Now, you'd think, okay, just a lab instructor, right? Well, it turned out the instructor of the class, as much as I like him, was not the best professor in the world. So I had 2-hour labs with these kids every week, and I'd usually spend the first hour going back over the content with them, and then the second hour actually doing the lab. And I'm just bringing this up because I discovered I do love teaching. So don't think that if you go into the industry, you're just going to work in the industry forever. I'm doing it just because I got to get paid. I do work at Microsoft, but in the end, I would like to be a professor. Probably an associate professor, not be with tenureship. But yeah, so there's a lot you can do outside of just programming for some company. It's not a career to go into, much as it's lucrative. There's so much fun you can have. So speaking of college, and what you can do in open source in college, we had this experimental class called Video Games and Evolution. It was, I say experimental because it was designed my junior, maybe senior year. This computer science professor, one of my favorites, Terry Sewell, who had taught like artificial intelligence and genetic programming classes, I think it was computation, like that. He got together with a biology professor, and they're like, you know what, let's get 15 biology students, 15 CS students, and see if we can make a video game that demonstrates evolution, especially evolutionary programming. And we actually did it. So this was Evolved TD. We had a tower defense game that we created. It was written in a language called Processing. This was mostly to make it really easy to develop. Have you guys used Arduino at all? Processing is Arduino for Java. That's really all it was. But yeah, these creeps actually had genomes, and after each wave of creeps would go by, the best ones that survived would actually repopulate. And we'd run this for a bunch of generations, and they could get really good at avoiding you killing them. It was a lot of fun. And kind of my point with this story is we actually open sourced it. We developed it in class. The professor came to me before the class started, and he asked, hey, how are we going to get 30 students to collaborate? Do we use a shared Dropbox folder? Good, as I see the look on your face right here. So, depending on the CS program, you guys might not learn version control. What I've seen in the last couple of days is you guys have a pretty good system to get people understanding how to work collaboratively. But we actually did, I taught everybody Git. We had this on GitHub, we all worked through it, and we made a GPL. And the students, most of them hadn't used Git before, they hadn't, biology students had never programmed at all before. But it's kind of the success story of open source in school. Like, you shouldn't be afraid to just try it. Just try learning Git. Like, yeah, people made mistakes, but it's version control. You can fix mistakes. And actually, I'm going to jump over to my computer to show you what happened from this experiment. So not only did we have a success and a cool game at the end, we incubated their polymorphic games student-run game development studio. And they have just come out with a cool game that I just have to show because these guys are fantastic. So they made Space Invaders with the same concept. No, I won't go back. There's no audio, is there? No. Okay. So this studio has gone on and continued to use like evolutionary computation in games to make an incredibly difficult game. This is actually available on Steam. It's open source, but you can make money off of open source, because even though the source code is open, you know what, there's people like me who are like, this is a fun game, I will pay you guys $10 to play it just to support your continued development. And it works out. You should do that with your own stuff. If you make a game, make it open source, put it on GitHub, let people learn from your code and help them contribute, and don't be afraid to still try to make money off of it. I see a lot of apps go up on the App Store that are like, that should be open source, and people ask the developer, hey, can't you open source this? And the response is often, well, no, I want to make money. That's false. You can make money from open source software, so you shouldn't be afraid of giving your code away. In fact, this entire talk is to encourage you to give your code away, in my opinion, under a copyleft license, so that like GPL. So you give your code away and people have to give their contributions back to you because that's the whole point. But yeah, it worked out. It was a success. It was fantastic. Here's the next slide. Cool, fixed it. So, kind of coming back to what I realized through school. I ended up being pretty successful at learning a bunch of skills on my own, mostly because I had some friends at, I don't want to call them better schools, but like, the guy was at Penn State who turned me on to GitHub. He's like, yo, just learn Git and start putting your stuff on GitHub. And that was sort of the start of my story. And I just want to make sure that you students here who came today know of some skills that you really should learn. So first off, of course, Git. If you're writing code, any code, the most basic assignments that you have to do for your school, please just put it in a Git repository, force yourself to use it. You will be happy in the end once you've learned how to use Git and learned that you can go back and find your bugs by running a Git bisect, which does a search through your history to see where you broke it. It's an amazing tool and everybody should know it. But more than that, I know a lot of people have been told, hey, you should write some tests for your code. It's useful. Write automated tests for your code. I had a compiler design class that you guys will probably take as well at some point. I decided to go the really kind of fancy route, and I broke all of my code in the library. So I had like my syntax tree library and had all these data structure libraries written in C that I wrote some unit tests for and hooked up Travis CI on GitHub so that when I pushed code, my unit test would run and tell me if I broke something. So the really nice thing of having my code broken out, open source on GitHub, was that not only could people fix it for me, and they have had people open issues on bugs in my code and have improved my library since, but I also was able to go through this class and actually, by breaking down the code into its components and making sure each component worked in an automated fashion with continuous integration like Travis CI, at the end of the class, I was writing my compiler and it was working. I wasn't debugging segmentation faults like a lot of my peers were. I wish I could have told them to write unit tests and use Travis CI. So I'm telling you guys, write your unit tests and get some continuous integration set up. It will continue to be useful, especially as you go into industry. You'll find the same problem. People don't like to write tests and they don't like to use automated tools, but you can and you should. Just learn from my mistakes. As long as I'm here shilling things. The GitHub Student Developer Pack is awesome. So GitHub you probably know about, and I've already mentioned it a few times, but GitHub's a large website for incoming freshmen where open source code is hosted. And while GitHub doesn't open source their own software, and there are issues some of us have with that, they do a lot of good services, especially for students. So go Google the GitHub Student Developer Pack. It'll give you $50 DigitalOcean credit to host your own services. I think they give you AWS credit. I think they give you a Namecheap domain. Check out the GitHub Student Developer Pack. And if you have absolutely nothing that you've put into a repository and no reason to have used Git before, no homework assignments coming up, put your dot files into a repository. I'm sure most of you guys probably use Emacs or Vim or other stuff if you're starting to use Linux. As you start to configure your tools, your little dot files, my .emacs.d or my .vimrc, put them into a repository. Don't put passwords in it. Put that repository on GitHub and check out everybody else's for ideas on how to improve your own tools. .files.github.io is fantastic. So, just some stuff you might not be taught that I really think you should. Okay, so that was kind of my my time in school, like working in open source. I put all of my assignments into open source repositories and put them up. I eventually took them down once I graduated. I was like, I don't want 20 assignments here anymore. But it was good practice, and you should check with your professors. I've heard there were some times you weren't allowed to do that here, but still, when you can practice open source, do so. But I ended up transitioning, of course, from a student into Microsoft. This was a rather sudden transition, actually, I'd say. I mostly worked like tech support jobs through college to pay for college. I ended up interning at Schwartzmeyer Engineering Laboratories, where I was doing some software engineering work, and actually was turned on to continuous integration with like Jenkins. But I ended up at a career fair, as it happens, and I'm sure you guys have had a career fair in the last few days, so it looked like a lot of fun. I was walking by the Microsoft booth, and I had zero interest in Microsoft at all. I was walking by them, not to them, because Microsoft doesn't do open source. Microsoft doesn't do Linux. Microsoft's all about Windows, 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 and open source is a cancer. But, you know, turns out that's not true. This guy at the booth grabbed me and I'm like, sure, I'll do an on-campus interview. What's the harm of practicing your interview skills? And I went to interview. And my interviewer was this guy named John Fawcett, who was a 40-year Unix programmer at Microsoft. And I just did, I think, a triple take. I was like, what are you working on at Microsoft that's open source and uses Linux and Unix and all these tools that I thought Microsoft had nothing to do with? Well, actually, it turns out, not only was he working on open source at Microsoft, we have an entire group called Enterprise Open Source at Microsoft working on Linux and working on open source tools. We have the Linux integration services. These guys work in the Linux kernel, actually. So one of Microsoft's products is Hyper-V. It's a hypervisor to run virtual machines like VMware and VirtualBox. To make Linux run on that, you need your drivers to work well. It used to be the case that Microsoft would make these drivers and give you, the user of Hyper-V, a package to install. And a fantastic guy, KY Srinivasan, went to some higher ups at Microsoft and were like, look, we would all benefit, not only us developers at Microsoft, but the community as a whole and our customers, if we took our drivers and put them in the Linux kernel tree, open sourced them, worked in the real world with the community directly, because the point of open source is that everybody can fix your bugs when they find it. Somebody's using Linux VM running on Hyper-V and finds a bug. They don't have to bug you to fix it. If they're so inclined, they can fix it themselves, and the license of the kernel says, hey, you should take this patch and submit it. And so he got all their sources open sourced, I want to say 2010 maybe? I don't know, don't quote me on that. But so we have a Linux kernel development team working at Microsoft. They're fantastic guys, and if you're interested in kernel development, you should check out Microsoft. I actually, for my senior project, got a couple patches of my own in the Linux kernel. If you pull up the Git history, my name is in it. That I'm pretty proud of, and I think most people here would probably be too. So, you know, there's really so many avenues to get into open source. The other stuff we do in this open source group at Microsoft is a couple tools, Mesos and Cloud Foundry, and I'll get into Mesos in a little bit. That's my own current project. I have coworkers working on Cloud Foundry. I don't know too much about it, but they seem to have a fun time, and it's also all open source work. Like, I come to my Scrum and people are like, yep, I got my pull request open. They're working on GitHub. This does happen in the industry. I think my next topic is going to be PowerShell. That's kind of what brought me here today. And also the .NET Foundation, which if you haven't known, C# is now open source. It's on Linux and Mac and really anywhere that you want to try to run it. I think they even have ARM64 support now. So don't think of Microsoft as the old company. It really has changed. I've read articles by Richard Stallman himself, who I love as an idol, who still thinks Microsoft is the whole embrace, extend, extinguish like philosophy with open source. I don't think it's true anymore, because the reason Microsoft is doing open source is that they've realized the benefits for everybody to work with free software, and they've hired people like me who love working with free software. So I think, in my personal opinion, this company's changed. Now, speaking of PowerShell, this is kind of the, in the industry, doing open source from the inside out. PowerShell had historically been a component of Windows. The sources were in the Windows source tree. When I first tried to build it, I was told I needed to download the Xbox sources as well, and I went, why? Why do I need Xbox sources to build PowerShell? This makes zero sense. What are you guys doing? I came along June 2015 to Microsoft. I started working with the same guy, John Fawcett, that I interviewed with and interned with, and this project fell into my lap. They hired a guy, Peter Honetter from Austria, who got a Hello World working. And I have to give you a little bit of a rant on the build system. So, of course, originally PowerShell's in Windows, using the Windows build system called Razzle, which you never, I promise, ever want to come across and use in the real world. Somebody hacked up a Python script that would pretend to run Razzle and take all the build outputs, like what would the output, and encoded it into JSON. This guy came along and wrote some JavaScript code to take all these JSON objects and generate make files so that he could build the same sources on Linux manually. Let's just say it wasn't fun to fix, maintain, or try to understand. So, at all. So, I came along, I had about 2 months with this guy, and he skedaddled, he went back to Austria, he kind of handed it to me, he was like, you got this, kid, go for it. So I went for it. I had a repository of the PowerShell sources, I had a repository of the build system, build system was Python, JSON, JavaScript to make files, and it's just awful. Like, my first task was just upgrade the libraries we were using. We had an old copy of .NET Core, and they'd improved and fixed some of the bugs we were waiting on them to fix, and well, I couldn't update the libraries with this build system. It just didn't work. But being open source, being the .NET Core had gone open source, they had build systems available. They weren't the best build systems in the world, but we started with DNX, which was ASP.NET's way to build their code using .NET Core on Linux. It was the .NET execution environment. And with some help from a cool guy named Garrett, we sort of prototyped up a new build of PowerShell that didn't use Razzle at all, didn't use JavaScript, and just built from this same repository, no external stuff going into it. And this worked, but then they killed DNX. It was open source, so we could continue using it, but I mean, I can't use a build tool that doesn't exist. Well, hey, guess what? People still need to build C# code on Linux, and so they came out with another build system, .NET itself, .NET, that was the name of the command. I think .NET CLI maybe. And I took that and got it working, and went back to the PowerShell guys and said, hey, I have a single repository of all of your source code. It builds by itself on Linux, and I think we can get it to build on Windows too without you having to download the Xbox sources. Most of them weren't interested. They were just like, nah, it's never going to happen. But there was this one really cool guy named Sergey. He's like, that'd be really nice if I didn't have to download gigabytes and gigabytes of sources to build this tiny little project. So he and I hacked at it for a couple days, and guess what? We made it work. So the whole, I guess, moral of this story is we eventually got the PowerShell team on board. People were, of course, reluctant, as you'll find in the industry. Not everybody wants to change. People have their way of doing stuff. You bring them a radical new idea, like an entire new source code repository from them. These sources were in Source Depot, which you also don't want to use. Put them into Git. But you know what? If you show them the benefits of open source, if you explain to them that, hey, if we get this out there on the internet, all these bugs that you haven't had time to fix, guarantee you have interested users who might just give it a shot. If you let them fix it and let them give your code back to you, you have work being done for you. So enough of them agreed that we went for it. And they actually got really excited once they realized how much simpler all of this could be. So I kind of want to show you another video. This was us actually open sourcing this repository. I've been working closed source with the carrot on a stick, and we're going to open source this eventually, guys. But this was us doing it. And these were Windows people. They've been working in closed source for some of them decades. And when they saw what we could do, 116. I'm not going to make you watch all of this. But just a little bit. We wrote up a script. This was a private repo on GitHub, and we wrote this script where all of us main developers could come along. I could come along here. We'd all hit enter, and after this, next guy comes up, who's a fantastic developer, Jason, comes up, hits enter. This will actually be flicking the switch, the moment in time we put PowerShell on the internet, and kind of, in a sense, wow the world, mostly not from the technical field, like the technical challenge of this, we're all trackable, we obviously can solve it. It was more the change in Microsoft itself, and I think it changed the general trend in the entire industry to put code out there and share it so that people can work on it. That's all of us. These guys are kind of giddy to get their code out there. It's a new company, but I think it's a new world too. Everybody wants their software to be free. Let's go. Now, speaking of benefits to working in open source, I've mentioned .NET Core a few times because PowerShell is written in C#, and well, if you want PowerShell to run on Linux, you need C# to run on Linux too. And there's this entire other massive group at Microsoft called the .NET Foundation that took C# and stripped it down to its core components called .NET Core and made this cross-platform and open sourced it as well. But here's the real kicker. When I was porting over PowerShell to Linux, obviously we need a readline library. It's a shell. I need to be able to take characters as people are typing them, see that they hit a tab and do tab completion. And you know what? System.console only had readline. I couldn't read key. I couldn't see if somebody typed a tab. Originally, I went to their repository and I explained this. I'm like, hey guys, There's a secret project I can't announce yet because that video hadn't taken place yet, but suffice it to say, I need read key. I need console.read key. Initially they told me, no, just link to readline. We met actually the guy Thursday night who wrote readline, Ryan Fox. I wanted to link to readline. It's LGPL. Theoretically, we could have linked to it without our code being GPL, but as much as I try to say that Microsoft has changed, there's still holdouts. If you try to go to the lawyers and ask them, can I link to a LGPL library? It doesn't happen. But that's okay because I was still in touch with these guys. There was an open issue. I told them I can't use readline because of licensing issues. Like, oh, we understand. Well, let's see if we can just add console.read key. I also explained, other people writing apps might want to just be able to read keys as they go in. And so we did it. I worked with this guy, Steven Tua. He was a principal architect over at .NET Core. We added read key functionality to .NET Core. We did it all in the open source. He could have been at a different company. It doesn't matter that he was at Microsoft. The fact of the matter is, this code was on GitHub. I found the guy who'd written the system console code. I went to the file on GitHub and did a play, and we're like, hey, dude, can you help me with this? And he did. We added console read key to .NET Core, and they actually have gone on and added even more features that they originally weren't going to implement because people found them useful. So open source benefits the users of it. It benefits the companies who own the code. It really benefits everyone. Free software, I think, is the foundation of our society going forward, considering that our society is entirely reliant on computers nowadays. When you have your source code closed, you can't fix it and find out what's going on. So make it open. Now, the other side of this, the flip side, so that was inside out, closed source code at Microsoft. We convinced them to open source it. We also do it from the outside in. There's this really cool project, Mesos. How many of you guys know what Kubernetes is? Okay, passive familiarity with Kubernetes. Mesos is for people who need Kubernetes at a big scale. It is a container orchestration technology. I won't go into a huge depth on it, but if you need to run a distributed application with a ton of computers, you need something to make sure the task is still running on the computers you told it to run on. Mesos is one of those. And what I've been doing, my current job, I moved away from PowerShell. I kind of open sourced it. I'm still a maintainer, but I wanted to work on other fun stuff. And lo and behold, Mesos fell into my lap. And I have now turned my entire team into Mesos developers. There was one of us, me. There was a guy who had originally done the port of Mesos to Windows. He pulled the same thing that the previous guy I worked with did. He's like, oh, cool, you got this. I'm going to go work at a startup now. And I kept working on it. It happens to me a lot. They just leave. I kept working on it. We now have Mesos with full support on Windows. The really fun part of this is all of my work is open source from the get-go. I don't write a single line of code in my day-to-day life at Microsoft that's not immediately put out there for the community to comment on, review, and help me with. So this kind of work exists, and you'd be surprised at how much we do open source at Microsoft. Mesos is a lot of fun. If you want to check it out, I'd say do so, but it's got a high learning curve, sadly, so it's not the best example for students, I think. But I don't really want to say wrap it up, but kind of the whole point of my talk here is how do I get you guys involved in free software? Not just telling you open source is great, but how do you go on your computer and start contributing? The way I did it was I started using Linux. Back when I was 9, I started using Emacs. I swapped from Emacs to Vim and back again because I promise you don't want to write Vim script for your plugins. But on the point of plugins, some of my very first forays into actually getting stuff, not just my assignments out on GitHub, but getting patches into other people's projects were Emacs packages. There was this plugin, DTRT indent, that analyzes the indentation of files already using and makes sure that as you're going along, you use the same indentation automatically. It's really cool. But like I said, I'd swapped to Vim previously, so I was using Evil. And Evil did a totally different thing with indenting. They had their own indent function, and of course, DTRT indent had no clue about Evil. So I went to the developer of this plugin, and I'm like, can we just make it set the Evil parameter? And he's like, no, I don't want to add code for every single package out there ever. I'm like, well, okay, what if we added functionality so that people could just add into their config file other functions that need to be set? And he's like, hey, that's a good idea. And I worked with him. I Didn't really know Emacs Lisp. Well, that might be a lie. This probably was the first package I worked on. But I worked with him to develop this new functionality for his own plugin. And he's like, all right, this is awesome. We tested it. It worked. He got it in. That's how you do open source. You just have a problem that you want to see fixed, and you spend some time to fix it. And these people aren't scary. They like accepting improvements to their code. I know I like accepting improvements to my code. So they'll probably help you get it in. You don't have to do it right the first time. They will happily help you do it right. Don't be turned off by horror stories of Linus Torvalds yelling at people. It happens, and I heard some giggles. Linus Torvalds yells at his own maintainers that are supposed to know better. I won't defend him a lot, but I have met him. But for the most part, people who work in free software all believe in the principle of improving the software continuously. So just jump into it. The other tools you probably use are Bash and GCC, of course. Now, as long as I'm telling you to use free software, I'm also going to tell you to free your software. Not just make it open source, which I think I've hammered pretty hard, but use copyleft licenses. So the difference between the general public license, the GPL, or like the Affero GPL, and a license like the MIT license is the protections it provides to the users. So an MIT license says, hey, I have this source code. You as a developer can come along and copy it and do whatever you want with it, and that's the end of it. I gave the code away. You could go make an application and distribute the application and never even tell your users that the source code in there originally came from this open source project. The GPL is totally different. The GPL believes that anybody who uses GPL code should have access to that code. So if you came and took a GPL plugin that I wrote and you modified it and you distributed it, my license, the GPL license, says you have to continue to give away that free software. Anybody who uses your new plugin also deserves access to the source code so that they can fix bugs that they find in it. So it's, in my opinion, the best license to use. The Affero part of the GPL extends to hosted software. I'm a geek, and like I said, I started in politics, so the legalities of this interest me a little bit. But it says that if you're running Nginx on your server, I don't know if it's GPL, but we'll use it as an example, and you modify it, users of your server, even though they're using a client, are also entitled to the server source code that's open source. So default today, GPL v3, if you have no other license to use and no strong preferences, I'll plug that as hard as I can. Now, this is kind of a talk of how you get into open source. I think I made that point clear. Hacktoberfest is coming up. Has CACM told everybody about Hacktoberfest?
Yes. We're going to have like a Saturday meetup on it.
Awesome, come to their meetup. So Hacktoberfest is hosted by DigitalOcean. If you make 4 pull requests on GitHub within the next month, you get a really cool t-shirt, and I think that should be enough reason for people to do anything, because I mean, I love free t-shirts. But you'll also have started your contributions to the community. So seriously, check out Hacktoberfest, get a free t-shirt, come to their stuff. I'm sure you guys will help any student out who doesn't know what to work on. This will help you find a project sufficient and interesting to you to do. So yeah, Hacktoberfest is awesome. I have the 2016 shirt, I better get the 2017 shirt. Okay, so I told Ish that if he gave me an audience, not only was I going to plug open source software, I was also going to rant a little bit about privacy. This is loosely related to open source. So Richard Stallman, the writer of the GPL and the founder of the Free Software Foundation, he has done all of that because he believes in the user's right to the software, and we also tend to believe in the user's right to their own data. We're protecting user freedoms. So the tangent here is, I want you to think about, for a second, all the data that you've given away to Google and Facebook and Snapchat. I'll give you an example of myself. I was using Gmail. So Google had every single email I'd ever sent or received. Their terms of service, of course, explicitly state, hey, we're going to scan your emails and serve you ads based on what you're doing, what you're saying in your emails. So that's scary enough. But they also had all my calendar events, so they knew who I was meeting with and where. And I use an Android phone, so they had all of my contacts. They had all of my location information because my GPS was on, and I use Google Maps, and I liked it telling me when my commute was coming up. or at least I thought I did, but I don't miss it anymore. I used Google Chrome, and so cool, it's a fast browser. Firefox has gotten sluggish over the last few years. Get the Firefox. But that meant that Google Chrome had every single website I visited, and if that website wasn't secured with SSL, which there's no reason nowadays for that to be the case, they would have everything I gave to that website. So, oh goodness, then Google bought YouTube, so Google knew every single video I like to watch on YouTube. I'm using an Android phone, use Google Play Music, so they know every single song that I like or don't like. I think I even was subscribing to podcasts through Google Play Music, so they knew my political leanings too, because I knew what podcast I was listening to. Amazon knows all the books that I read because I use a Kindle. It's scary. This should scare you that we're just giving this data away for essentially free. We say it's for services, but you know what? There's other email services out there that don't use your emails to serve you targeted advertisements. So let's go over some tools you should check out. Go to privacytools.io. This has most of these on here. This is a fantastic website that I wish I could claim credit for, but I only just discovered it. It goes over all the different kinds of software you're probably using and alternatives that are generally free software and actually will respect your privacy. They won't snoop on your emails and they won't snoop on your text messages. Speaking of text messages, you use Signal. It's an easy-to-use app. You install it, it replaces WhatsApp or iMessage or your just normal Android texting. People always tell me, yeah, but who am I going to text on Signal? I can pull up my phone. I think I have the top 12 people I regularly communicate with. They use Signal now. Why? Because I put it to them this way. Would you hand me your phone and unlock it and let me read through every single text you've ever sent? Like, no, of course not. Why do you hand it over to the NSA, the government, and anybody else, the telecommunication companies? You probably are uncomfortable with any random person reading all of your texts. So don't send an unencrypted text. Check out Signal. So back to Google Chrome. Yeah, Google Chrome came out at a time when Firefox was getting slow and sluggish and people who wanted a fast browsing experience used Google Chrome. Firefox just came out with release 57 and hit the beta channels. It's called Firefox Quantum. It is probably the fastest browser out there now. They've been replacing a lot of their rendering engines with Rust-based implementations. Rust is an amazing piece of the amazing new language you should check out as well. Firefox, by default, respects your privacy. The main developer behind it is Mozilla. They're a nonprofit. They're not in the business of serving you advertisements. Unlike Google, who all they want to do is give you advertisements, so of course they want your data. A nonprofit just tries to make good software, and it's open source, so you can inspect the code and see if it's sending every website you visit away. So check out Firefox. I use Postio for my email now. I may not recommend this for everyone because it's quite the step, but it's a German-based encrypted email service. I like it a lot. There's alternatives. Privacytools.io lists a ton of them. ProtonMail is really popular with people. But seriously, get your email out of Gmail because even though I use Postio, if I send you an email to your Gmail address, Google still knows what I said. I don't want that. I don't think you want that. So ditch Gmail. You should also, I mean, I have an audience here. If you're reusing your passwords, please stop now. This delves into security, but I think it's important enough that everybody should use a password manager. Okay, there it is. There's some cool hosted solutions like LastPass, which I used for a while, but now I use KeyPass XC. If you used KeyPass like way back in the day, and it's Windows only and it's kind of bloated, KeyPass XC is a community fork that's regularly updated. It works on every platform, Mac, Linux, Windows, AutoType works. It supports two-factor authentication, so you can put in your 2FA secret, and you can set it up to automatically type in your email, tab, your password, hit enter, wait for the page to load, put in your two-factor code, log you in. It's a really cool tool. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 more on here, but this is pretty close to the end. Pi-hole, right here, this guy, is one of the coolest projects I've ever come across, and I hate to say I only discovered it like 2 weeks ago. This is a incredibly easy to install piece of software. It's one line. If you've got a Raspberry Pi laying around, it's perfect for it. So you stick your Raspberry Pi onto your network, you install Pi-hole. It's a local DNS server that blocks ads at the source. When your browser which you should be using an ad blocker, but heck, your smart TV probably doesn't have an ad blocker available. So when your smart TV tries to send metrics about what you're watching back to its servers, well, first it has to do a DNS lookup of the server to send it to. Pi-hole says, oh, hey, you're requesting super not obvious at all spy organization to send all your data to. Here's a blank web page. We resolved it, and it never makes it out of your local network. I love Pi-hole. It blocks, even though I am really religious about using ad blockers, I just have 12% of my requests, my DNS requests, are still blocked. Windows diagnostics, not diagnostics, but the Windows reporting on your usage, even though I've turned it off, still gets blocked. My smart TV still gets blocked. My Kindle, the ads on it still get blocked. So Pi-hole is fantastic. Check it out. And one other piece of software you should use. Google is good. They do one thing incredibly well. They do search as well. I will not argue with anybody about that. If you try to use Bing or Yahoo or DuckDuckGo, you switch back to Google. I know I have done it multiple times. But there's Startpage. They're based out of Europe. They take your query, they anonymize it, they go to Google with your query, they get the results, they bring it back to you. Google doesn't know that anybody but Startpage searched for something. So you can get Google results without giving Google the information that you're searching for all this random stuff. So check out Startpage too. And finally, go, please, become a student member of the Free Software Foundation. The Free Software Foundation was created by Richard Stallman. How many people went to see Brian Fox Thursday night? Yes. Okay, so you know how cool Brian is, then you already know how cool Richard Stallman is. The Free Software Foundation is probably the best bastion for protecting users' rights when it comes to software. I think a student membership is $60 a year. It goes to a charity. You get a really cool... Wake up. You get a really cool badge to put on your blog that tells people how long you've been a member. That was that one, the red thing up in the corner there. So you get to put that on your blog. You can get an email address like this, angela@member.fsf.org. You get to go to Libre Planet for free, other than travel. So do check out the Free Software Foundation. And the other foundation to check out is the Electronic Frontier Foundation. You've probably read about them in the news recently for withdrawing from the W3C. Anybody not familiar with all of this? Yeah, okay, so DRM is awful. Good God, I could rant on so many things today. So all of you who are interested in computers know a basic fact. If you can see some content and hear some content, you can steal that content. You can copy that content, you can back it up, because guess what? In the very simplest form, it has to be displayed on a screen. You can put a high-quality camera in front of it and record it. So when companies come along and try to implement digital rights management, when they try to make it so that you can't copy the content, they're just making it more difficult for people to do legitimate things like back up their movies that they bought. DRM is awful. The DMCA should be repealed. But recently, they actually managed to standardize DRM extensions into HTML5. There were a lot of people fighting against this. It's one of the very first things the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, has done without unanimity, without every single person agreeing to it, especially not the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So they've withdrawn from the W3C. I'm a little angry at my own company for being one of the large corporations that strong-armed DRM into HTML5. It's quite sad, but the Electronic Frontier Foundation does a really good job of trying to protect your rights online, trying to protect net neutrality, so that if you go write the cool new competitor to Netflix, that you don't just not get used because Netflix is paying a god-awful amount of money to make their stuff fast and your stuff slow. Check out the EFF. Donate to them and become a member, and go be a member of the EFF. It's awesome. Okay. Hey, look, I actually did take up most of an hour. So I've got a Q&A here. You can ask me anything about what I did in school, what I did at work, whatever. If you have questions about how to do open source or stuff, hit me up. Good questions. I'm not scary, I promise. You have?
Yeah, so I'm a Linux user mostly. When I do have to use Windows, I'll often install git bash as a prompt. What makes PowerShell so exceptional that I would want to use it, especially on Linux?
That's a hard question for me to answer. Okay, I'll say that PowerShell is neat. I do think that when they designed PowerShell with this object-oriented model versus text, they were hitting on something really quite smart. So there's this guy, Jeffrey Snover, who wrote a white paper on, hey, all these Linux shells, everything you do in them is piping text around, which means that the programmer has to manipulate text, when really what they're trying to do is manipulate data. Manipulating text gets annoying. I'm sure you guys have struggled writing a proper set query or awk or grep. It just gets annoying. And they tried to address this with PowerShell. They wrote a shell that uses .NET objects underneath. So if you have a process, if you call get process, you don't just get a string of text where you would have to parse it and find which column has the ID you're looking for. You could actually call get process, the process you want, and then call a method on it and tab complete through it to find the pit. It's actually pretty neat in that aspect. On Windows, PowerShell is incredibly useful because they didn't have a good shell at all previously. And so if you're using Windows services like Hyper-V, PowerShell is where they've written all of their automatic configurations. So if you have done system administration at all, I did it really early on in my career, most system administration was done with the GUIs. It was really annoying. PowerShell solved that. It let you write scripts to configure Windows computers. So if you're on Windows, you could use it. If you're on Linux, what they're trying to do with PowerShell on Linux is unify the interfaces among stuff. Now, I think they might have been beaten to the punch a little bit with like systemd, but it used to be the case that getting the list of services on your different distributions, it was a different command on every single distribution. The big goal with PowerShell is to start to unify this stuff. Somebody can write a PowerShell class called get services for Linux that, depending on your distribution, will get all that information and turn it into queryable objects. So I think it's a noble goal. I think there's a lot said to having an object-oriented shell versus a text-based shell. I actually think it's less of a competitor with Bash and more of a competitor with Python. The PowerShell scripting language is pretty easy to use. And more importantly, it's written as a shell. So if you're scripting and you want to call some native tool in your system, you just call it and you can pipe its output to something in PowerShell. In Python, you have to go like import, call or whatever, make the explicit call your thing and then deal with getting the standard error and the standard output manually. Not in PowerShell, you just treat it like you're in a shell. It's like writing Bash, but with better scripting around it. So there's a lot to be said for that. You also mentioned Bash on Ubuntu on Windows, the Windows subsystem for Linux. You can use that on Windows if you want. It's not free software. It does implement the API of Linux, but you don't have access to the source code. So I personally, speaking for my company, not the biggest fan of that, but I actually also disagree with Stallman. He wrote a recent article on how Microsoft is still trying to embrace, extend, and extinguish with the whole Bash on Ubuntu on Windows. And I disagree. I think Microsoft feels a little threatened in the developer space because how many of you have MacBooks in front of you versus like Windows computers? Yeah, I have a MacBook right there because as a Linux developer, without having great Linux laptops out there, System 76, whatnot, MacBooks give you Bash. They give you the free software you're used to using. They give you the interface so that you can develop something that's probably going to work on Linux minus some differences between BSD and Linux. And Microsoft didn't have that for Windows. You'd have to like hack through it with Cygwin and stuff. And so I think really they're just trying to compete with MacBooks for the developer space. So in that sense, I use Bash on Ubuntu on Windows to pull up a nice terminal where I can type SSH and get into my Linux machine. So yeah, you can use PowerShell for its object-orientedness, and you can use WSL for the nicer experience it gives you on Windows. You should still go and write free software and try to prefer it. Any other questions? I've touched a lot of stuff, so go for it.
Do you think something like Office could ever be open source and still maintain the revenues that Microsoft expects?
Can Office be open source and retain revenue?
The same amount of revenue.
Same amount of revenue. Yes, I think it's quite possible. I think that Microsoft has already seen people stop buying Office, mostly because Google Docs became a pretty viable competitor. It's really easy. This presentation is a Google Docs slide. I think what Microsoft has realized is you can't compete with selling software anymore. People don't want to purchase a license to use software. They still like easy to use things. So mean, Microsoft has kind of pivoted from Office. Their solution now is Office 365. It's totally reasonable to get paid for Office 365 because it's a hosted solution. So you go to a company and say, hey, we'll manage your Office 365 instance, we'll give you PowerPoint in your browser for all of your users, you pay us this amount of money a month. I don't know the exact numbers, but I imagine that's going to make a lot more money than selling Office licenses ever made. So that's one side of it. There's also the side of it where you don't have to make it easy to use open source software. I think you should. But if Microsoft gave the source code to Office away, they don't also have to give away freely installable binaries. They can still sell you the easy-to-use installer, and guess what? Most people are probably going to pay them $20 for an easy-to-use installer instead of trying to take the source code and create one themselves. So, yeah, I don't think open sourcing software like Office or even Windows really puts a dent in revenue, because I think as we see more services shift to the internet, as we see people use AWS and Azure and Google Compute Engine, I think the main companies are seeing the money is in selling compute time. The money is in selling their data centers, not in selling software anymore.
Any other?
What's your perspective on encrypted messaging platforms that are still backed by larger corporations such as WhatsApp that's encrypted, iMessage which is encrypted?
That's a really good question. I don't personally use WhatsApp. I don't personally use iMessage. WhatsApp has the benefit that they did implement the open source Signal protocol for their encryption. However, we've already seen, I don't know if we have proof of this, but we've seen evidence that Facebook is still, even if you don't use Facebook, but you do use WhatsApp, well, they still use your contact data. So there's a lot of metadata that may not be getting encrypted, even though they're sticking true to the literal statement of your messages are encrypted, they're still taking a lot of your private data. So I personally prefer implementations that are fully open source. Yeah, that's my perspective on it. iMessage, you don't even know if it really is encrypted. It probably is. I won't say Apple's lying about that, but if the user can't prove it. Oh, actually, no. Let me reiterate what Brian Fox said in his Q&A, where most of these companies do security through obscurity. iMessage is an open source, and Apple doesn't open source much of this stuff at all. They say they're very privacy focused, but A, the users can't prove that they're privacy focused, and B, the bad guys, the black hat hackers, still probably have access to Apple sources because they're the ones who are going to break in and try to steal it. If you make that software open source, you get all the gray hat and white hat hackers looking at it too, trying to solve your security bugs before the black hats. So there's a lot of good benefits to open sourcing the software, and I don't implicitly trust closed source software. I like that question. Anything else? Yeah.
You mentioned before that you like the way systemd is finally unified the control interface for setting settings on Linux. But do you think it represents a good path in terms of tightly coupled required components?
I absolutely do not think it represents a good path for tightly coupled components. I think systemd is making a lot of mistakes. They alienate a lot of users and developers. They have a good idea. The execution is maybe not the best, though. I really do believe in the diversity of systems. So one of the things we brought up in Brian's keynote in his Q&A is decentralizing the internet, decentralizing software. When everybody uses the same software, when everybody uses systemd, if there's a security bug in it, now you've compromised everyone. But if you have a diversity of software, you just reduce the chances that everything can go down once you get rid of the choke points, the single points of failure. Right now, if Google went down, most of the internet would go down. I mean, honestly, most people wouldn't be able to search. Most people wouldn't be able to check their email or their calendars. Yeah, it's frightening to look at how much would go down with just one or two companies having a bad day. So I believe in using decentralized software and different implementations so that people have a freedom of choice. I think it's pretty typical to use as a